Ryan stepped out of the transfer tube and felt the air hit him like a cold slap. The corridor smelled of hot metal and old oil, and voices rolled down the hall like a distant tide. Above him, a giant hollow panel showed the War Games arena in bright color. The arena was larger than any hangar he had known. Ships and fighters moved across the field like slow insects. The games were older than most governments. They were older than the ban that kept humans away. He slowed his steps and let the crowd push him forward as if he were only another face. He wore a visor and a suit with a name tag that was not his. The name tag read Salon 9. His real name was Ryan. He carried that true name like a small ember in his chest, something to guard when flames came near. He had memorized the route from the transfer gate to the selection ring. He had memorized phrases guards might say and how his hands looked when they shook. He walked like someone who had practiced calm while his world burned. At the security arch, a line of alien officials scanned each body and each mind print. The scanner lights were green and cold. A marshal with a silver crest did not look at him twice. That was luck. Luck was a small god in places like this. Inside the selection hall the sound changed and tightened. A low hum thrummed through the floor. People found seats. Different species sat in rows, some tall, some with many limbs, some with faces like carved stone. They watched the hollow screen and chewed the sweet, salty food the hall sold. A child laughed. Someone high-fived a friend. Ryan went to a dark corner and breathed shallow. He had a reason for the risk. He remembered the last fight he had seen as a boy. He remembered his village as a line of broken walls and the sky tasting of burnt wires. The treaty that followed that day had ended human entry to the games. The aliens said humans could not be trusted with the rules of play. Some said humans used war like a blunt tool and broke the tool. Ryan did not want to argue treaties. He wanted one thing, proof that humans could be different. He wanted one honest chance. The announcer on the hollow panel spoke in many tongues. The games would begin in an hour. A screen in the corner flashed faces of champions, each name celebrated by flags and chants. No human face was shown. The crowd cheered louder when it saw a champion with bronze plating braid its hair. Ryan pressed his back to the cool wall and closed his eyes for a moment. He felt the visor's microgrid under his fingertip. It held forged credentials and a patch of data he could not show to anyone. He would not be the first to try to cheat the ban. He would not be the first to fail. A small animal-thin alien with too many teeth touched his shoulder. It smiled. Nervous, it asked in a language Ryan had practiced. He smiled like it was the right thing to do and lied that he was not. At the far end of the hall, a door hissed open and a group of recruits were called. Their names pulsed in bright light above the doorway. The announcer said selection would move fast. Ryan's chest hitched. He could see the selection ring through the open door like a bright eye. He had built his whole plan on one short moment inside that ring. He had built it on moving fast and confusing the judges long enough to show what a human could do. He had also built it on luck. The hollow screen stuttered for half a second and the cheers dropped like a net. The scanner arch in the entry glowed a thin red. A single line on the guard's console blinked twice. People looked up and the marshal's hand moved to a calm control she liked to press when trouble might start. The thin alien squeezed Ryan's sleeve and whispered, "You do not belong here." Ryan breathed out and let the lie settle over him like a cloak. He stepped forward when Salon 9 flashed above the doorway. As he moved he saw a small logo pulse on the edge of the arena feed, the League of Fair Play. That glow was familiar from old broadcasts he had watched as a boy. Then, as he crossed the line, a scanner in the floor hummed and a thin ribbon of light ran up his ankle. The ribbon tested biosignals that mattered: heart rhythm, bone density, known gene tags. Ryan felt the ribbon warm like a fingertip and his throat went dry. He had expected a quick pass or a quick fail. He had not expected the feed to split and show two images at once, one of the arena and one of a family portrait. The crowd gasped when the family face flashed someone's home, someone's memory. The console clicked soft. Then the red light on the arch flashed sharp. A voice over the speakers said, "Unregistered human signature detected." The marshal's silver crest narrowed its eyes. Ryan wanted to run and wanted to kneel at the same time. He thought of the one truth he had not said aloud: he had signed up not only for himself but for every human who still remembered how to believe. He stepped into the ring with his head high. The door closed behind him with a soft finality like a verdict. The ring smelled faintly of ozone and old smoke. The judges were a circle of thin, stone-faced elders and one young official with a face like polished glass. Ryan noticed small details a person finds when they need to hang on to sense: a small scar on the elder's brow, a stain on the judge's sleeve, the way their eyes moved when they lied or told the truth. A broadcast camera swung to him and framed him like a single bright object. No human had been shown like that for decades. Ryan felt the heat of unseen eyes, millions of them, like sun on his skin. A child in the crowd pointed and laughed. A woman covered her mouth and looked at the marshal. The young official read a single line from the selection sheet. He asked Ryan to state his name and origin. Ryan spoke the false name and his voice was steady even when his hands were not. The official paused like someone who had smelled an old rumor. The judges whispered. A small bell rang when the youngest judge tapped a data pad. The bell's tone was a thin thing, like a thread breaking. Ryan's mind jumped to memory and to reason. He remembered how humans had once changed a battle by choosing mercy instead of triumph. He remembered how they had surprised the galaxy with strange, stubborn kindness. He did not know if that memory would help now. He only knew he had to try. Outside the ring, the crowd's mood shifted. Some beings murmured with interest and not all of that interest was hate. When the judges finally leaned forward, the camera closed in. The league logo pulsed again and the announcer's voice filled the hall with new words: "Let the test begin." Ryan steadied his breath and prepared to show a skill no one expected from a human. He kept his true name like a warm ember in his chest and stepped forward into what might be the end of everything or the start of something new. He breathed slow and held his fear tight again. The ring lights fell like a slow rain and Ryan felt every one of them on his skin. The judges watched with eyes that did not smile. The young official read the test rules: a brief trial of skill and choice, nothing that should force a species to reveal itself, he said. Ryan heard the words and kept his face calm. The first test was simple on paper: navigate a short field, retrieve a marker, return without touching certain plates that would trigger a penalty. The field smelled of ozone and oil. Ryan moved with careful feet, listening to the hum in the floor and the soft clicks of distant machines. A camera followed him like a quiet bird. He saw the marker across a shallow trench and planned his path. Time was thin. Beside the ring a figure sat watching him with interest, a tall alien with pale skin and hair like braided steel. She wore a low badge that read kYeah in a script he had studied. Her eyes were kind, and when she nodded once he felt less alone. He did not know if she sensed the truth, but something in her face gave him a small courage. The test began and Ryan stepped forward. Plates clicked under his boots and some hummed with a light meant to catch cheaters. He moved slow and then faster, practiced maneuvers tucked into his muscles from old training runs on ruined streets. When he reached the trench he did a small thing no alien expected, he slid low, not to hide but to see the pattern of pressure plates on the other side. His body remembered a child's game that had once saved his friend in a firefight, a human trick of reading space by touch instead of sight. He crossed and the marker came into his hands with a soft beep. Behind him someone shouted a rule that did not matter anymore. He ran back but a plate near the end flashed and the bell in the judge's hand trembled. For a heartbeat the hall drew a breath. The young official leaned forward. Ryan counted his steps from memory and adjusted his stride so the plate read only a light brush and not a full weight. The bell did not ring. The judges murmured and the audience shifted. Cora leaned close to the rail and mouthed a single word that Ryan did not know but felt like praise. After the trial he was allowed to remain in the ring for a secondary test, a verbal puzzle meant to probe logic and empathy. The elders liked to see if a competitor would choose a cold victory or spare a weakened foe. The official asked a simple question about whether strength should be used to win or to teach. Ryan spoke of both. He told a short memory of his village and of a time when mercy had stopped a spiral of violence. He did not say human out loud. He did not have to. The judges frowned and wrote on their pads. Later, when recruits were asked to mingle, Ryan moved through the crowd and felt eyes on his back like small knives. He met a veteran named Haroon who had once been in ground games and now worked as a trainer. Haroon did not like humans because of old scars, but he watched Ryan with rounded curiosity and asked about the boy's origin. Ryan gave a story of a far trade world and an apprenticeship under a metal worker. Haroon laughed at the details and then, to Ryan's surprise, offered a small tip about timing in the arena. "Listen to the floor," he said. "The whole place tells you what it wants." Ryan stored the phrase. Later in a quiet corridor Cora found him and spoke in soft clicks he had practiced from stolen lessons. She asked why he had risked the ban. Ryan told her simply, he had been a boy when soldiers came and his sister had been pulled from her bed. He wanted to prove to the galaxy that humans could be more than weapons, he wanted a voice for those who could not speak. Cora's face changed like the sky before rain, she touched his sleeve and whispered that she believed him more than she should. That small trust felt like heat. But the middle of the day brought a twist Ryan had not planned. A guard tapped a console and the selection feed blinked with a note only judges could see. A security flag had tripped earlier in the hall. Rumors passed like sparks, someone had tried to slip a human through last cycle and failed, a list of known human signatures had been tightened. The marshals began to ask sharper questions and a thin inspector started to eye the crowd for biological oddities. Ryan felt the net tighten. He could not show what made him human, not the small scar on his wrist from a childhood scar fight, not the way his laugh came too loud when he was afraid. He had to be careful, and he had to move fast. As the selection day closed, the judges called the names of those chosen to stay for training rounds. Ryan's forged name was spoken. He stepped forward with his chest heavy. Cora's hand brushed his as she passed and she mouthed one word like a prayer. Behind the judges, a private line on a console blinked red and the inspector's gaze fell like a blade. Ryan felt the color rise in his face and held it down. He had won a place but not safety. The hall's hum grew deeper and a new danger moved through the crowd, suspicion. He had made a friend, learned a trick, and shown a sliver of what humans could be, but the truth waited like a storm beyond the doors. The morning after the selection felt like a held breath that would not leave Ryan's chest, and the games showed another side he had not seen on hollow screens as a boy. Behind the bright banners and the cheers was a library of sealed rules and a quiet wing where the league kept its older, darker papers. Cora guided him through a narrow service corridor she said few recruits knew, and they came to a door with a small lock that accepted only a veteran's handprint. Inside, under dull lamps, a man with thick hands and tired eyes sorted thin sheets of paper into piles while a low archive hum warmed the room. Haroon, the trainer who had once given Ryan a tip, stood with a key that did not match his badge. He moved like a man who still carried battle echoes in his bones. The three of them bent over a stack of reports that did not speak like public pages. The reports told of past champions who had won the games and then disappeared from their home worlds, taken not by the League but by quiet decisions and secret clauses that had never been read aloud to anyone outside the inner rings. Ryan read lines that used words like containment and reassignment as if they were simple administrative steps, and his stomach turned the way it had the first time he had smelled smoke on the wind. Haroon did not hide his anger when he spoke. The game was not only sport, it was a place to steer power and to remove inconvenient species from the map. Cora's fingers found Ryan's wrist and squeezed once. She said she had watched the official tapes and seen champions vanish like bookmarks pulled from a book. She believed the ban on humans had been sold as safety but held another seam sewn into it. One that widened whenever a species looked like a threat. Ryan held his ember of a name tighter. He had come to show humans could hold honor, not to trade one set of chains for another. The three of them made a small plan that fit into pockets and whispers, enough proof to force a question in public, but not enough to hand them all to the marshals who loved tidy answers. They would gather witness accounts from forgotten trainers and the maintenance crews who moved crates and files, people who understood how the League's public face hid a private hand. Ryan learned to ask the right small questions, the ones that loosened tongues without sounding like accusations. He learned how to read a ledger and how to follow a crate number to a ship manifest that mentioned a name and then stopped. Each hint pulled at a thread. Even Haroon, who had once said he did not like humans, watched Ryan when the boy bent over the lighting feed and found an old clip where a champion closed his eyes before vanishing. The veteran's jaw worked and he did not make the hard turn away he often made when something hurt him. Ryan showed them another gift that night, something he had kept private because it could both save and damn him, a small talent for reading micro-patterns in behavior, a skill honed on streets where survival required knowing how someone would move before they moved. He could watch a judge's blink and tell if the lie came from fear or greed. He could stand near a ship's docking bay and feel the lies in the way crewmen tightened their grips. He used this skill inside the archive to point out the one ledger entry that read like a loop, a file that began again with a different code and the same names wrapped in silence. Cora's face lit with belief in a way that warmed Ryan like sunlight. Yet not all lights in the games burned kindly. As the trio worked, a whisper reached them from a lower deck. The inspector who had scanned the hall earlier was now reviewing genetic tags with a new algorithm, one that could find a human signature with better than old luck. The marshals tightened the net. Ryan felt each step heavier. He had a secret and a chance, and each made him both brave and close to falling. The deeper they dug, the more they saw how much the League wanted control. The games gave the Council an excuse to test species for weaknesses and to seat allies in new places of authority. Ryan wanted to stand in the open and shout the truth, but Haroon warned him that shouting without proof would bring disappearances faster than any game. So they chose a safer move: gather the testimony of a retired mechanic who once refitted a champion's rig and later found a crate with no return slip. The mechanic trembled as he told his story and named a dock where the crates left under moonless nights. Cora recorded the tale on a scrap device that looked older than the hollow panels, because older tech was harder for the League to read. The scraps grew into a map that fit under Ryan's palm and into a list that could be read aloud in a hall if someone brave enough stood up. Brave was a word that fit Cora better than most. She moved through conversations like someone who loved truth enough to lose friends for it. Ryan felt his ember warm at her courage, but he also felt how small he was against a machine that had run for centuries. At the end of the day, when the selection crowd had gone and the arena slept under clouds of recycled air. Ryan sat under a stair and watched a feed of the league's public speech where officials smiled and insisted the games were fair. He compared that feed to what he had seen in the archive and felt their faces as masks that hid sharp edges. He thought about his sister and the village walls and the ember in his chest. He had not planned to become the spark for a bigger fire, but he had to choose now how much of himself he would risk. kYeah touched his shoulder and said a soft thing that sounded like a vow. Harun, who had watched too much for a man his age, folded his hands and said only that the truth needed a witness in the ring and a witness outside it. Ryan closed his eyes and felt the games breathe around him like a beast. He knew the rules hid more than they told, and he knew the League would not give up power without a cost. He also knew that if humans had a strange strength, it was the way they could hold hope in their hands like a fragile, stubborn thing and walk toward danger anyway. The training ring smelled of sweat and hot metal and the air hummed with quiet engines as Ryan stepped inside again, but this time the tests were harder and the judges watched him like hawks ready to strike. He moved through drills that pushed balance and speed and logic, and each time he did something small and human, an odd feint, a stubborn step, someone in the stands would murmur and the inspector's eyes would tighten. For a week Ryan kept his cover and learned more from Harun and kYeah than from any lesson book. Harun taught him timing and when to breathe out, and kYeah showed him how to read faces for the truth under words. They grew close in the way people do when danger bends them together, trading food and jokes and quiet truths in corners no cameras saw. Then the day came when the betrayal started, not with a shout but with a silence. During a combined exercise where teams raced over shifting platforms and kept a fragile relay core safe, one of the veteran recruits, Voss, a long-limbed alien who had watched Ryan with a sour eye since the selection fell at a wrong time and a safety lock failed. The core flashed a warning and a section of the floor sank where Ryan stood. For a breath the audience thought it was part of the test, then the bell rang like a judge's gavel and the marshals swarmed the ring. The inspector pointed at Ryan and said with cold calm that his biosigns had alerted to an unauthorized modifier, a tiny device of human make found near the relay core. Ryan felt his world narrow. He had never placed such a thing. He had never touched the relay core except with his bare hands to steady it. Yet the data pad in the inspector's hand showed a trace code that matched a common human pattern. The hall filled with a new kind of sound, hard, quick questions. Voss's eyes glinted with something like triumph and relief. kYeah reached for Ryan and the marshal pulled her hand away like a thing that might burn. Harun's face closed like an old scar and he stepped forward to speak with the inspector, but the inspector waved him down with a hand that meant, "Leave this to me." The judges whispered and the young official read rules that let them detain any competitor with a modifier for further testing. Ryan could have fled then. He could have broken into a run and used the crowd like a curtain to vanish. He felt the ember of his real name burn hot and raw in his chest and he knew running would save him but leave kYeah and Harun open to suspicion and pain. In the moment when fear and duty weighed like stones, he made a choice that surprised even himself. A small trainer shouted that the core needed manual hold or the exercise would collapse and innocent recruits would be crushed under shifting platforms. Ryan saw one of the junior competitors, a childlike being who had not yet learned how to fight, slip and reach for the falling core. Ryan moved before thinking. He lunged forward, grabbed the core, and held it with both arms while the floor moved and sparks flew. He did the thing the judges would later call reckless and the crowd would later call brave. The core stopped its alarm and the child did not fall. Ryan felt metal bite his palms and smelled hot dust in his nose. The inspector put a cuff on him not for the device but for his unauthorized contact and for the risk to the games. When they dragged him through the corridors, kYeah shouted his name and the sound of her voice stayed with him like a rope. Harun's jaw worked and his hands did not move. Behind the marshal's stern face Ryan saw Voss watch with cool eyes that did not hold guilt. In the holding cell, while guards ran scans and the court prepared a quick hearing, Ryan realized how the League used rules like nets and how easy it was to drop a blame where it fit a story. The device found near the relay core had a serial that traced to a dock where shipments left for closed worlds, an old shipping line known to take people and refuse questions. Haroon's low voice when he came with a file told a new truth. The ban on humans had layers, he said, some spoken in treaty language and some written behind closed doors to silence troublemakers and move populations that were useful to certain council members. They had always dressed control as safety. Someone wanted humans out quietly and they used the games and a fear story to do it. That was the secret that hurt more than cuffs. Ryan had a choice again: keep his head down and play the part of accused cheater to try and work from the inside, or open his mouth and tell the hall what he and his small group had found, at the risk of being thrown out and branded forever. He thought of his sister and the line of broken walls and the ember of his name. He thought of the child who had slipped in the ring and of Cora's hand searching for his. He could not let silence be the thing that kept others from seeing what was true. So when the hearing began before the judges and the League broadcast waited like a hungry thing, Ryan stepped forward and said he wanted to show the council the dock manifest and the chain of shipments and the reports from the mechanic who had seen crates without return slips. He admitted he had been in restricted halls and that he had friends who had helped him find old files. He did not confess to the planted device because he did not know who had put it there. He instead named the pattern he had seen. The games were a tool and the ban on humans had been sharpened by those who feared change. The room went very quiet. Some faces in the audience folded with anger like paper. Some judges leaned back as if their seats had become uncomfortable. The inspector scowled and the young official's mouth thinned. Voss muttered and cast a look like a thrown knife. Cora's hand found Ryan's, hidden under the table, and squeezed so hard it hurt. The cost of truth fell on him fast. He was taken from the hall not as a hero and not simply as a prisoner but as a spark the League could not let burn unchecked. Yet even in the dark corridor, as guards walked him toward a ship that would carry him to a hearing off-world, he felt something change in the air above the games, whispers that would not be stopped, a doubt that tasted like rain. The transport to the off-world hearing smelled of oil and closed metal, and Ryan kept his hands folded so the guards could not see them shake, but he watched and listened through the bars like a man learning a new map. Outside the ship the stars slid by like silent witnesses, and inside the ship Cora and Haroon moved like ghosts at the edge of the palace's reach, working a plan that had to be quick and small and full of risk. The hearing hall was a bowl of light and polished stone and voices that had power in them, and judges in high chairs spoke in slow, carved tones while hollow feeds waited to carry their pronouncements across worlds. Ryan stood in the dock while the young official read charges that sounded clean and final: unauthorized access, endangering recruits, and tampering with equipment. He felt each charge land like a weight. Then Haroon, who had found a way into the maintenance grid, released a patch of old tech into the League's net, a single, hidden channel that could not be cut once live. Cora had a recorder and a face that asked nothing less than full truth. When the court paused for a private deliberation, the patch opened a window on every broadcast channel at once and a single file began to play: the dock manifest, the mechanic's voice telling how crates left at night, and a ledger with names and labels that stopped at points where the paper had once been ripped out. Millions watched without choosing to. The judges' mouths moved, but their words could not close the images sliding through the hall like light. Ryan felt the room tilt. He had not planned to steal the airwaves from the League. He had planned to bring proof to a friend and hope the friend would carry it to someone who could act. But Haroon's hands were steady and Cora's eyes were fixed on him, and when the manifest showed the same pattern Harun had warned of, champions who left and never returned, the public could not unsee the holes the League had tried to hide. Panic and outrage arrived in waves. Some in the council shouted for silence and legal restraint. Others covered their faces and looked at each other like people who had believed in a story and then found it a lie. Outside, in streets and docks and small houses, beings who had never thought the games might carry cruelty now felt betrayed. Ryan's name was called on the feed by strangers who had once cheered champions. They asked why, and the question hung in the air like a hand offering a choice. The inspector tried to cut the signal and the young official pounded a console, but the old patch ran like water through stone. The broadcast showed, next, a clip one of the maintenance crews had hidden, a champion stepping into a crate, a number fading on a manifest, and the crate lifting on a ship that never returned. The room grew very quiet except for the hum of the hollows and the sound of breath. The judges could not unring that bell. Ryan felt the ember of his name burn hot and, without planning it, he stepped forward and spoke into a public line. He did not make long speeches. He told what he had seen in the archive. How the games were used to move people and power, and how the ban on humans had layers that cut both simple fears and quiet crimes. He told the story of his sister and of the child in the ring and said that humans could choose mercy and that mercy could stop a will meant to grind lives. His voice carried in a way he had never hoped. Some listeners hissed in anger. Others listened like they had been waiting for the truth. Korah's recording pulsed in the feeds while Harun's ledger scrolled like a slow knife. The council tried to regain order by detaining Harun and Korah, but the axe had already set a new law in motion: when the public sees a wrong, the wrong cannot be hidden without cost. A faction of minor worlds who had long resented the League's control began to ask hard questions on their own channels. A veteran judge who had watched the feed with a face like stone stood and, to the surprise of many, called for an open inquiry. It was not a full victory. The League still had power and could move fast when it wished. Ryan was taken from the hall under guard, not freed, and the inspector promised punishment for the breach. But the tone above the games had changed. People on distant moons stopped their daily tasks and gathered in small rooms to speak Ryan's name. Korah's whisper that had once been a private vow turned into public demonstrations in small ways. A maintenance crew refused to move a sealed crate, a trainer asked for a full accounting of past champions, and a child on a far station drew pictures of people not as winners but as friends. Harun, in a dark cell, smiled once like a man who had given a weight to the world and known it might tip. Ryan understood then that his choice to hold the core had not been only about saving a child in a drill. It had shown a thing the League did not plan for: humans could risk themselves for others even when no gain came. That image spread faster than any law. As they led him away to a ship bound for an uncertain trial, he held his ember of a name and felt it not as shame but as a small heat that might light a path. The games would go on and the League would fight back, but the seed of doubt had been planted, and the galaxy had begun to wonder whether a ban could hide what it claimed to protect. The day of the trial felt like a slow storm moving across the sky, and Ryan walked into the bowl of the courtroom with his hands cuffed and his heart steady even though his legs shook. The judges sat higher than before and the young official who had once read rules now looked smaller beneath the weight of the public feed. Harun and Korah were brought in under guard. Their faces were tired but they held a strange calm that kept Ryan from falling apart. Voices from 100 worlds listened through the nets and the hollow panels, and some places gathered crowds to watch the hearing as if it were a new kind of dawn. The inspector read the charges again in a voice that tried to sound final: sabotage of League property, false broadcast, and aiding unauthorized access. Ryan could have pleaded guilty to theft of files or asked for leniency in exchange for names and places. He could have traded handfuls of truth for his own safety. Instead he looked at the judges and spoke in a voice that reached beyond the bowl and into rooms where people who had never thought about the games now sat very still. He told them exactly what he had seen in the archive and what the mechanic had said. But he also spoke of why he had risked the ban, not for fame, not for reward, but because he had seen a child fall and because he believed mercy could stop a will that ground lives. He refused to hand over the mechanic or casual witnesses who had already given testimony in secret. He said that naming those who helped him would put them in danger and that truth without protection was a blade that cut the wrong hands. The room shifted. Some judges scowled at his refusal like it was stubbornness, some faces in the audience softened like old scars finding air. kYeah, taken to the stand, read aloud the mechanic's file and the ledger pieces she had hidden in an old recorder. Harun, called last, spoke with a voice that had the weight of a man who had seen too much cruelty and still chose to act. He said the League had built a machine that could hide wrongs and that the public now had a right to see. The inspector tried to push for quick punishment and for a secret exile that would hide the matter, but the feeds had already changed the tone of many worlds. A faction of minor systems demanded an open inquiry and a veteran judge who had once remained silent stood to back the call. The council argued in private channels and the loudest voices no longer belonged only to those with authority. Protesters and sympathetic trainers refused to move sealed crates and small stations simply stopped routing some shipments until accounts were clear. Under that pressure the judges found a middle path. Ryan would not be free, but he would not be erased either. The court ordered an independent inquiry into the League's shipping and champion records, and it placed Harun and kYeah under conditional release to aid the investigation while they stood trial for their breach. The inspector seethed but could not fully close the door that had been opened. Even with this small victory the cost was real. Ryan was barred from any official games activity and the League demanded he leave the games zone on pain of imprisonment. He accepted the ban without anger because he had expected it and because exile could not take from him what the public now held. In the weeks that followed the inquiry slowly peeled back archives and opened old vaults. Names appeared on manifests where no names had once been written. Ships were traced and small hearings convened in quiet docks that had once been ignored. Some council members tried to spin the findings as old errors and poor record keeping, but in many ports people remembered champions who had once been cheered and then forgotten. The public's memory became a net that caught more than the League wanted. Across systems, humans who had been shadows in the records found advocates in unlikely places. A trainer who had once hated humans marched at a small rally and said that a human had the courage to risk himself for one more life. A child who had watched Ryan on a feed drew a picture that showed many species holding hands, and the image spread from station to station like a small, stubborn light. Ryan kept his Ember name in a pocket worn by travel and letters came from far-off places from people who wrote of seeing his stand and choosing mercy in a small way. Harun found work with the reformist committee and kYeah became a liaison between the inquiry and crews who had feared speaking. The inspector found enemies in quiet halls and his push to silence the matter only made others dig harder. Voss, who had helped plant a device in the ring, was publicly censured when maintenance logs he could not explain were pulled into the inquiry. He slunk away from the games and his triumph looked smaller in the face of revealed facts. In the end there was no clean victory. The League kept much of its power and treaties did not change overnight. Some worlds still argued that humans were dangerous and must be kept away from the games. But the games themselves were different in the way a tide is changed by one stone dropped into the sea. The current had shifted. More people asked questions at selection halls and more trainers checked manifests. The rule that had once been a closed law began to show cracks where light entered. The galaxy learned something new about humans: they could risk themselves without reward, they could hold mercy as a weapon against cruelty, and they could force a room full of judges to answer to millions of small witnesses. Ryan, standing on a quiet dock one evening as a ship slid into the sky, felt the ember of his name warm into something larger. He would not see the end of the league's choices, and he might never get to step into the games again, but he had done what he came to do. He had given his people a voice and shown that sometimes a single human choice could change how many worlds saw a truth. He walked away with no guarantee and with a hope like a small lamp in the dark, and that lamp lit a path others would follow.